The operational considerations for the shielding approach, as well as for the use of green zones, should concern you. And in this video, we're going to talk about some details that you need to be aware of now. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about green zones as well as the shielding approach and why you need to be aware of it and be prepared for it now. The whole approach to this situation is to limit contact between high-risk and low-risk individuals during a crisis. And this is a situation that takes us on a path that many preppers have talked about for a long time. And even the verbiage of the word camp is utilized within the details of these plans quite often. And if these are the plans and the camps that preppers have talked about for a long time and you're worried about being taken away to them, then hit the subscribe button below, because by knowing some of these details and being aware of what's happening, you can better prepare yourself to not have to get on that bus when the time comes. And this is exactly the direction we're heading in, and I don't think anyone has a problem believing that these things can be a reality at this point in time, okay? So, first and foremost, we're limiting the contact of high-risk and low-risk individuals. What does that mean? Well, high-risk individuals are basically people that have pre-existing health conditions, autoimmune disorders, they're elderly, or even, I would assume, the very young. And these are all people that are going to be considered high-risk during a crisis. Those people can't be around the low-risk individuals because they have a higher chance of perishing if they contract some sort of a disease. So, they will be placed in what are known as green zones, and these green zones are safe havens for high-risk individuals. But you have to utilize the shielding approach in order to establish these green zones and make them successful. So there are multiple levels to the shielding approach that you need to know about. And within going into these details and with actually going through the information that's been provided to the public, some concerning areas actually start to pop up, and you start to connect the dots and you start to see what this really is. And I'm going to go through all that information with you right now, but in order to be best informed, I did link the literature involving all of this in the description as well as in the pinned comment below. So make sure you check it out and do your own research. But here's the areas of concern that I found to be a problem and that you needed to be aware of, okay? There's 3 levels of shielding. First, there's the household level. And what that means is that a room or an area within a home is designated a green zone, which means a high-risk individual is contained in the green zone and has limited interaction with anybody from outside of that green zone. So what that means is that low-risk individuals shouldn't have any interaction with them, or if they do, it should be extremely limited, and they should follow all of the standardized guidelines, such as social distancing, wearing a mask, proper sanitation when it comes to cleaning your hands and everything else like that, or washing them, whatever you do, clean them, wash them, it's up to you. But those are all the typical things that we're hearing and that we know are already in place. And this is something they're talking about for like within a household, okay? So we get that. But this is when things start to get interesting. Then we move on to the neighborhood level. What is the neighborhood level? Well, the neighborhood level is where a neighborhood-sized community basically has to designate a green zone within their neighborhood, and then that green zone now houses all of the high-risk individuals within that neighborhood. And this has to be like 5 to 10 households max, okay? So we're talking like a cul-de-sac, okay? So in your cul-de-sac, if you're in the neighborhood level of the shielding approach, what's going to happen is you're going to have to designate a green zone within your neighborhood. What that means is one of the homes is going to be selected as the green zone. And that home, the people within it are probably going to have to move, and then it's going to be utilized as the place where all the high-risk individuals now stay, with limited interaction and limited contact to the low-risk individuals who remain on the outside of the neighborhood in the other homes, okay? Now this is an issue because first off, it's going to displace people, and it's going to ask people to leave their home in order to use it as a green zone facility, and then those people are going to be displaced and moved into other homes within the neighborhood. So you're starting to remove people's private ownership and remove people's privacy and move them in together in uncomfortable situations and remove family members from other homes within the neighborhood. Sons, daughters, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whoever it may be, from the home if they're high risk and into the designated green zone home. You can see how this becomes extremely problematic. And of course, they have little contingencies about people who are like minors being able to have a single caretaker within the green zone home and all those kinds of things. But either way, you're displacing people, you're taking them out of their home, you're kicking someone else completely out of their home, moving them into those people's home and moving those people into different homes. And that's exactly what they think should happen in this situation, which is obviously going to cause a lot of problems, okay? But don't worry. There's one more level in the shielding approach, okay? And that level is called, well, because they like to use certain words in these situations, the camp or sector level. Now, the camp or sector level, what does that mean? Are we talking about like a bunch of tents? Are we talking about some kind of sector of a town? Camp or sector level is where you have a designated green zone utilizing some sort of community facility, like a school or a convention center, and you designate that as a green zone for that area. So yes, your small town is being referred to as a camp because anything outside of the green zone is now a camp. And there's not a cap on the amount of people that can be within that camp, but there is a cap on the amount of people that can be within the green zone designated for your sector. And that's 50 people max. So what they're trying to say is you're going to utilize a school or a community center as your green zone. And you're going to take the high-risk individuals from your sector, or I would say if you're in a giant metropolitan area, probably a district of some kind, and you're going to move maximum 50 people into that facility, okay? And then what they're saying, and this is just, you know, how it goes, is that they're going to treat this facility as a very secure location. And what I mean by that is that there is one entry point used for exchanging supplies and food, okay? Only one entry point. There's not multiple, there's only the one, because obviously it's easier to manage a single entry point, okay? Now, there's also going to be a meeting area. The meeting area is for loved ones, relatives, family members to see their family members or their loved ones in a certain way, a very restricted way, I'm sure with time limits and certain guidelines in place, probably with lack of physical contact. And I wouldn't be surprised if it meant having some kind of privacy glass or something like that in between the meeting area in order to maintain some kind of distance, right? So, the meeting area, the single point of entry, and there will be zero movement in or out of that green zone. What they mean is that once those people go in, they don't leave until they're told they can. And the other people who they were taken from aren't coming in either. No ins, no outs, zero movement, okay? Just to paint a picture as to how this green zone is supposed to look, because we're trying to save and take care of the high-risk individuals. Now, when we're talking about these different levels, you can kind of see that whether or not you're a prepper or whether or not you're somebody who supports all these types of actions and is very gung-ho on these types of scenarios, once people's children or grandparents or sickly family members are removed from their homes and taken to a green zone and kept there without the ability to be taken out, we'll see how people's opinions change in that moment. But it gets even better, okay? So, how does it get better? Well, I can tell you that although the max amount of people within those green zones is 50, once you get to the camp or sector level, which, what a great way to use that term, right? Once you get to 50, that's the max. You can't have more than 50 people in that green zone. And what that means is that it doesn't matter how large the town is or how large the surrounding area is. If that school is designated a green zone and it receives 50 high-risk people, the next area has to be selected as a green zone in order to get more people in it. And the whole thing about this situation is that they don't care how displaced this makes people. They don't care how overcrowded the area around the green zone becomes, because they want a certain amount of space per capita in the green zone to eliminate the need for being in close proximity. So they're going to take a giant facility like a community center and maximum put 50 people in it. Then they're going to have to take another building in order to put only 50 more people in there. Now, this might not seem like a big deal if you're in a small town. You could say, well, magic, you know, if they take 50 people and put them in the school here in my town, we're not going to really know a difference. In fact, it's going to be less people in town now. So what's the whole deal with the overcrowding aspect? Why do they say they don't care about overcrowding in that regard? Because when you live in a big municipality, a metropolitan area, okay, and you have to start limiting these giant facilities to only 50 high-risk people at a time, they're going to have to start selecting locations and buildings based on population and designated them as green zones, and then only allowing 50 people to be within them. And imagine how quickly those buildings will become very spacious, while the people who used to be inside those buildings are now somewhere else, which might have already had occupancy. This is what I mean. They don't care about overcrowding. If they have to take over an apartment building, move every single person out of it so they can move 50 high-risk individuals, maximum 50, into that building and displace the other 300 who live there, where are those 300 going to go? Maybe to another apartment building that already has 300 people in it. Don't worry though, they're all low risk. And this is literally what they're saying, is that they don't care about overcrowding because this is what has to happen. And you can imagine in a town of, 2,000, when you have 50 people go to the school, yes, it's going to feel like there's less people in town now. But if you have a town of 200,000 and you have to take 5,000 people and put them in different locations, now you're talking about 100 buildings. And how can you get 100 buildings that are going to be considered safe for green zones, where you have to have proper sanitation and sewage and power and all the things that you need, and not displace anybody? That's why they're saying that. Because that's exactly what's going to happen if they follow through with this whole implementation. Okay? So, this is an issue. This is something you needed to be aware of, and I wanted you guys to be aware of this because it's happening. But, you knew it was coming. The areas of concern are within the operational considerations. And this is what you need to know. And this is the stuff that stuck out to me that I thought, okay, I see what's really going on here. And it's interesting the way that they used their euphemisms and their language to make things sound a certain way when really we know there's something else, okay? Are these the camps? These might be the camps. Everybody's talked about it for a long time, the prepper community. And now they're talking about it, and they're even calling your town a camp. I didn't expect that part, but here we are. Okay, so operational considerations. Here's things that you need to be aware of that's within those considerations. And like I said, the link to this literature is in the description as well as the pinned comment, so you can check it out yourself. But I wanted you to be aware of these particular details, okay? And I'm going to read some of this so that way I get it correct so you understand exactly where they're going with this. And keep in mind, we're talking about euphemisms here. Monitor and evaluate implementation of shielding approach. This is one of their operational considerations. And here's how they feel you need to approach that, okay? Monitoring protocols developed for each green zone. What does that mean? Well, you got to figure out, how are you going to monitor these green zones exactly? How are you going to make sure that everything's being done in a certain way that is established in the restrictions and the guidelines? How are you going to make sure that there's only max 50 people in that building? How are you going to make sure there's only one point of entry? How are you going to make sure there's no ins and outs? That's what they're saying. You have to develop that plan because every green zone is different. Your school might be different from my church, and that's going to require a different set of monitoring protocols, right? Okay, so they also say that dedicated staff need to be identified to monitor each green zone. Monitoring includes both adherence to protocols and potential adverse effects or outcomes due to isolation and stigma. It may be necessary to assign someone within the green zone, if feasible, to minimize movement in and out of the green zone. They said that in such a way, such a great way, you know? They have great use of language. But let me read that to you in a way that might make a little bit more sense and might make you understand why you should be a little bit more concerned about this. All right, so we're going to do this again, but I'm going to change the words to other words that mean the same thing. Okay, here we go. Security staff need to be identified to monitor each green zone. Monitoring includes both following rules and guidelines and sticking to protocols, and also includes the potential adverse effects or possible unrest that might happen because of the stigma and isolation of the people involved that are no longer able to access their family or have freedom to leave the building that they are now inside of, okay? It might be necessary to assign someone in the sense of guards at the door or on the perimeter to make sure that there's only the movement that's required by the authority source and not by anyone else. No ins and outs need to be coming through the building. Therefore, some type of guardship needs to be established at the entry points to make sure that it's not happening. That is another way to say it. And I said it in a very nice way as well, but in a way that has a different tone, in a way that has a different meaning, because what they tried to say was like, just a nice thing we're trying to do, but you might have to get somebody to like watch the door. But what I said is what they meant. And you know this, and we all know this to be true. Now, the other thing that we have to take out of this whole operational considerations list is that green zones should be more spacious in terms of shelter area per capita than surrounding camp sectors, even with risk of overcrowding, which we already talked about. But that is something you have to understand. Camp and sector is what your town's being called. They don't care how overcrowded, or what's another word for overcrowded? I don't know, like scarcity in the sense of resources? Because generally that's what happens when somewhere is overcrowded. If a ship out to sea is overcrowded, it usually is running scarce on resources because it was not prepared to sustain that level of population. And that's exactly what would happen with a lot of these implementations. Wherever these people are displaced to will now face its own crisis in the sense of shortages and scarcities, especially in the sense of housing, because of this displacement. All of this is being put out there, right there for us to read and to receive. And they're putting it out there now because they don't care anymore. It's no longer about a conspiracy. It's no longer about what if. It's now that this is the plan and you will follow the plan, and this is how we're going to implement the plan. Be aware of it so that you can prepare for it now. And be aware of it so you can react to it in the way that you need to now. Don't let this catch you off guard. And make sure you have this information to utilize to your benefit, because knowledge is power. I've always wanted to say that in a video, and I finally got to. So good. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that this is concerning, and they're just putting it out there at this point. It no longer matters. We're not trying to keep it under the covers. This is legitimately the camps that we were talking about, but it's not the way we originally thought. Now we're talking about my neighbor is the camp. The town is the camp. And you might be the green zone. And your high-risk individual, grandma, maybe your sister with an autoimmune disease, they're the ones who are going to go to the green zone. And they're not going to be able to leave. And they're going to have guards to make sure that they can't. This is where it's going. Wanted to bring it to your attention. This is concerning. It's something you need to know about. And comment below on your thoughts, because that's what we talk. The network is amazing, and the community here, great things to say. And it doesn't always matter if you agree with me, because somebody in the comments might get some information based on what you're saying that might help them be better prepared too. So I don't care if you agree with me, because the conversation is still a lot of times even more valuable. So let's make sure to have it. And if you ever need anything else from me at all, magicprepper.com is a great place to go to get a hold of me. But this is where things are going. I had to bring it to your attention. If you ever need anything from me, feel free to ask. I can't always say yes, but we'll at least have a chat. And that's going to be it for Magic Prep.